Hi, Doug.
Hello, how's it going?
Pretty good. Thanks for helping my project.
No problem, Nathan.
Could you say a little bit about yourself?
I am a engineer, PE, degreed engineer, mechanical engineering, and I've worked in the oil and gas business for 45 years. And before that, I was involved in the electric motor business.
And did you know that NASA is planning to send astronauts to the moon in 2024 for the first time since 1972?
I am aware of that.
And how'd you find out?
I am generally aware of space-related topics. I constantly scan the news. I listen for it on television and newspapers. I have subscriptions to more magazines than you can shake a stick at, and then I have numerous friends who also tell me. And yes, and being a member of National Space Society is also one of our major topics. So I found it out from some one of those, or I found it out 100 different ways, depending on how you want to look at it.
And what do you think about it?
I think it's long overdue. I'm real excited about it. This is fabulous. It sort of seemed like this U.S. space program the manned space program kind of went on hold for a very, very long time, decades in fact, and it's really good to see us moving forward again, more than just going around in circles around the Earth, which is very nice. I love the space station. I like the space shuttle tremendously. But I think it's important for us to continue moving outward at a steady pace. We need to set goals for ourselves and for our nation and for our children.
Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of people who are excited about it for the reasons that you mentioned, as well as like technology spinoffs, economic development,
yes,
national pride, inspiration for the next generation, stuff like that. We've also talked to people who aren't excited about it, and I was wanting to run through some of their reasons and see kind of how you process that.
I'm listening.
So one is opportunity costs. Why are we sending people to space whenever we have so many issues down here, like poverty, global climate change, social justice?
Well, there are two answers to that. This is what's called the false dichotomy issue. I would say that if we delay going to space until any one of these other issues, until we've achieved world peace, solved world hunger, you name it, then we will never go. Because that's just the way it is. As far as world hunger goes, by the way, the world produces more than enough food to feed everybody on Earth right now. The problem isn't food production, it's food distribution. And that's been true since certainly the 1970s when I first heard about it. So that's a non-starter for me. The space program harnesses people's abilities and gets them excited, and we end up with new products and new techniques and new methods and new equipment, things that we never would have done or achieved, say, if we were trying to figure out how to grow a better potato, or how to build a house for 15% cheaper. Those are all very good and solvable issues, but I think for a certain set of the population, they're not as exciting. They don't catch people's enthusiasm, fire people's enthusiasm as much as the space program does. The other aspect of this is the false dichotomy is that if we want to apply that rule of let's not do X until we solve world peace, it's like, well, let's stop building airplanes because airplanes are expensive to build. Let's stop building airplanes. Or automobiles. Automobiles are very substantial polluters. It's like, well, let's stop building automobiles until we've solved the problem of world peace. You can set up these conditions and it doesn't have anything to do, one doesn't have anything to do with the other. And that's the people trying to sacrifice the space program on the altar of some other goal. Their pet goal is really, I think, an inappropriate way to go about it. I think another aspect of this most recently is the Jeff Bezos and Mr. Branson going up into orbit recently. There was, for me, a surprising feedback, a growing wave from the media and from people saying, oh, well, it's just a bunch of millionaires, or in this case, billionaires, going up into space, and, well, it's just a fad, and, why don't they spend that money on other things, and it's like, well, that's an interesting viewpoint, because I'm interested in history, and I remember a time when cars were first being built by a guy named Daimler and Benz in Germany, and the same rationale was like, oh, these are just playthings for rich people, and they make the rest of us get out of the way on the road, and it's smelly, and it's like, so let's just stop building cars. If with that kind of mentality, we should have just stopped building cars in the year 1900, because none of us have any value for cars nowadays, do we? Okay, and then same thing, roll onward about another 30 years, and there's the thing about, okay, well, what about airplanes? When airplanes were first developed, it was, oh, well, they're just for rich people, and certainly that viewpoint extended up into the early 1970s. You had to be pretty affluent to be able to take a trip on an airplane. And so it's like, well, none of us have any use for airplanes, do we? I mean, we could have nipped that whole airplane thing in the bud with the Wright brothers and said, it's just for rich people, let's just walk away from all that. For the rest of us, it's not meant for the rest of us, or don't develop airplanes any further until we've solved the problems raised by World War I. And I think the world would be really a much worse off place if we didn't have airplanes. And the examples can go on. It's like computers. The first guy, the very knowledgeable people who ran like IBM, basically predicted around 1958. It's like the world market for computers is somewhere between 8 and 10, and only governments will be able to afford them. And it's like, well, so we should stop trying to build better computers. We should have just stopped right then and saved all that money, and think how much better the world would be now, 70 years later, if we had just killed computers when they were small. And it's like, I don't think many people will get on board with that notion.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
There is a small but vocal minority of people who really try to put the space program in that same category of, let's squash this thing, and then the rest of the world will be a better place. And that's just false. I know enough about how the world works that I know that that's not true, based on reading history and some kind of knowledge about how physics and business works. So we need to continue supporting the space program enthusiastically, and I really think that we need to have this type of a concrete challenge ahead of us in order to do things, in order to accomplish great things. When I was in college, I went to school with a bunch of guys, and most of them were engineers and some scientists, and they all had goals. And it was like, well, what do you want? I want to go to work in Detroit. I'm going to design a car that's going to be a really fast car, and it's going to work really great. And then it's like, okay, what do you want? Oh, I'm an aerospace engineer. I'm going to go build airplanes, jets that are even faster than the ones we have now, and it's going to work better. And on and on. Electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, everybody was excited about, after I graduate, I'm going to do something, and it's going to be something you can put your hands on, and it's going to make people's lives measurably better. The standard of living. I went back to school not very long ago, And I went to visit my fraternity house. Again, it was all engineers, and I don't want to pick on computer engineers really, really bad, but I got these guys, one by one, I got these guys off to the side and I said, so what is it you want to do when you graduate? You know, oh, and to a man, every single one of them, this was 20 out of 20, to a man, they said, they looked around conspiratorially and say, I'm a computer engineer and I have got this idea for a game that's way better than Doom 2. And it's like, well, beyond that, do you have, you know, and it was like, no, it's gonna be a game. That was their focus in life. And while some might argue that a more engaging video game makes people's lives better, it doesn't really fall, I think, into the same category as building a better building or a better car or a better airplane or a better nuclear reactor or something along those lines. And so the space program falls into that category of it pushes the envelope of technology. There are so many spinoffs. That have I exceeded my time?
No.
Okay, there are so many spinoffs that have come out of the space program, and people don't really know about it. And one thing that does dismay me is there are adults who you look at and say, where does electricity come from? And they point to the light switch or they point to the socket on the wall, the baseboard. And when pressed, they really don't know where electricity comes from.
More tours of power generation and distribution plants would be really helpful to people.
One thing that I was really happy about, I worked in oil field and gas industry for years, was my son, when he was 9 years old, came back from third grade one day and he brought a picture, and it was a picture of an oil well, of a rig, and everything was labeled correctly, and it was colored, and he'd colored it in.
And he was in third grade?
Yeah, I was in third grade.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was great. I loved it, of course. You know, and I was like so proud. Wow, they're actually, you know, teaching something in school about, you know, this is Houston, and so it's great that they're supporting the local major industry in this way, at least giving the kids a little bit of an idea of how things really work. Because it is clear that a lot of people, including adults, have really only a superficial understanding of how things arrive at their fingertips. But so the space program, any kind of space program, private or the governmental, it's great. We need to get behind it, push as hard as we can to get things like more of this sort of stuff going. It encourages people to get engaged in the STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics fields, and that's can only be good. So, did I answer your question, or did I?
You did. You did. The false dichotomy, I think, is the sum thing. Is you know, that if we want to solve problems, we got to have people solve them. We have plenty of people with plenty of free time, with plenty of tools, but they're too busy trying to get other people to do stuff and actually applying it to solve the problems. You know, that's...
Yeah. And so the space program serves as a focus, and there is something viscerally exciting about big engines, rocket engines, the noise. I mean, I got interested in it when I was like 5 years old, and I guess I've never really outgrown my love for the subject and for the matter. So I think that a lot of kids, boys and girls both, I mean, rockets, airplanes, dinosaurs, yeah, if you can get a kid interested in any of those subjects, or hopefully all of them, I mean, this has a tendency to hook the kid in and say, oh, this is fun, come play. And then they're off and running, and they like school. And if you can get your child to like school, you're halfway to home base right there.
Absolutely. Well, if it was safe and affordable, would you take a trip to space?
Yes. In fact, I signed up for a trip to space with Adventure, Ackerman Dace Venture, the Civilian Astronaut Corps back in 1998.
Okay.
This was at the beginning of the X Prize for trying to encourage numerous companies. I think 20 companies eventually got on board or decided to try and compete for the prize, and ultimately it was
Scaled composites.
yeah, it was Scaled Composites that won, and of course they were bought out basically by Branson and Virgin Galactic, but there were numerous other competitors, and this was one of the other competitors, and it was here locally in Houston, and the chief engineer was a guy who developed the lunar module ascent engine, and they basically took that same engine design, and he retired from NASA, and that was going to be the propulsion for the rocket, and it was going to take off from the water out at Galveston, just offshore from Galveston, take off and arc over, do a suborbital flight, and then come back and land like a seaplane off the 39th Street Pier or the 41st Street Pier. And that they had already spoken with the then mayor of Galveston, and they had gotten permission that once they did 3 test flights, that would then be acceptable to be done right off the coast of Galveston, not far from the fun pier now, the amusement pier that's out there now. So, and they would have been flying twice a day, and so that venture, unfortunately, like some of the other, like all the other ventures but one, basically was ultimately not able to get the funding that they needed to make it happen. But it was still a great idea. The thing ran on LNG, liquefied natural gas, which is available like everywhere around the world. Basically propane tanks. And they had already flown down to, I want to say it was Caracas or Maracaibo, Venezuela. They said that after they did the flights to take care of, they needed $7 million in order to get it funded, and divided by, I think it was 3,500 people or so at $3,500 a piece or something, and then they could get the money together, and then they could fly. And I signed up, sent in my money, and the wife wanted to go too, so we signed her up too, and ultimately they ended up refunding us all the money, basically because they couldn't get to the trigger point, even though they were doubling every month. The number of people who were signing up for this venture was doubling. But he just said, I'm a businessman, I have a time schedule here, and if I don't have this many people by this date, I'm pulling the plug on it, and everybody gets their money back, and that's what ended up happening. But I already signed up to go to space. I put my money where my mouth is, and at the time I was trying to, I got a whole bunch of brochures from them, and I was handing them out at work. It's like, everybody sign up, this is fun. And I was actually surprised at the number of the people who, they were interested, but they were like, is this guy serious? And it's like, how much? It's like $3,500, which in 1998 was a sizable chunk, but new cars cost twice that much.
Sure.
And it was like, yeah, and the biggest issue was they didn't believe he could do it. But it was like, but then they began to warm up to the idea more. I says, this is a former NASA engineer. He's already done this once. This was the rocket engine that brought the moon astronauts back,
right?
From the moon back to Earth. And then they were like, oh, but for that little money, yeah. And actually, I sat down and I did the calculations, and I looked up the cost for the propellant, the liquid, the propane, and the liquid oxygen, and I calculated that for the amount of money they were charging, it was like, yeah, they were making a significant profit. I confronted Harry with it at one point, and he kind of, well, look, I got to make money off of this. And I was like, okay, I understand. You got to pay for the rocket, you got to pay for the infrastructure, but it was a great idea. You launch out of the water, there's no gantry, and then you come back and land on the water like a seaplane. And they had a pilot who was held multiple world records, and he including flying heavies out of New York to like Paris and London, and then also seaplane ratings. And so really they could have pulled this off, but And then everything went to sleep for another 20 years.
Right, and now we're here.
And now we're here, and Captain Kirk finally made it to space.
Finally.
And so it's exciting, and it's about 30 years later than I would have wanted, but I'm glad. I'm just glad it's happening. And at this rate, Captain Kirk was 90 years old. I still, I'm not, I can make 90. If I live to be 90, I could save my money until then, and maybe I can make it. Maybe I'll have enough money to pay for a flight. The cost will have come down 20 years from now, I think. By
Plus,
then,
rejuvenation technology could be a thing.
I can hope for that. Yeah. So
you might be closer to your 20s and your 90s than we are now.
that's a very good point, actually. We were discussing this yesterday with some other friends, and there apparently some universities that are actually pursuing this subject quietly but diligently and making some steady progress. So I had not been aware of that until yesterday. So, hey, good news. It's all good.
Well, Doug, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything you wanted to add, or any questions you had for me?
No, I think it's a great idea that you're doing this countdown, well, we're all going to see at some point the good results from this countdown. It's going to be dramatic, one way or another. In how many days is it? It's
like 1,149.
1,149. Okay. Well, yep. It's getting closer every day.
Every day. Thank you so much.